morning I wanted to, as we did this small exercise of change, was just to prep us up to thinking about how, if there is one thing that is common to all of us, no matter what age we are or, what jobs we are into or what our life situation is, change is something we are all very, very interested in. There is definitely something in our lives that we want to change. I'm sure all of us would be able to agree with that. In fact, Winston Churchill said this. He said, to improve is to change. To be perfect is to change often. So if someone thinks we really don't have to change, you're probably really not going to improve and become better in your life or in the world. And if we look at the world around, things are pretty bad sometimes, isn't it? We have, on the one hand, there are earthquakes, then there are wars, and then if you look at families, there are significant needs in families. There is not that joy that we all long to have. And if you ask some married people, they'll say, "Oh, I wish my spouse can change." We're all thinking about how do we change something so that we can be happy. And this is an interesting quote by Leo Tolstoy. He said, "Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself." Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. So in a way, if we really want to change, has to start from us. How do we go about changing, though? What is the world's wisdom on changing? Everybody has an idea of change. Change is a very hot topic. It sells every time. And if you look at, there are basically three broad categories of how people talk about change. One is, if you look in the eastern part of the world, the part where many of us come from, there is a sense of denial to change. There is an organization called Art of Living. It's very popular in the U.S. They come and give lunch bag sessions in some of your companies. I'm sure some of you might have heard him. Sri. I don't know if you heard this guy. And he says this. He says, in Art of Living, there is nothing new. Everything is the same, meaning everything is changing, everything is recycled. Those who recognize the non-changing amidst the change are the wisest of all. I was so confused when I read this. What he's basically saying is there's nothing to change. It's all, life goes in a cycle. It's up and down. And so the second group piggybacks on this and says, if you really have to change, you just have to escape reality and just go into yoga or, pick a hobby. Just lose yourself in something the world has to offer, and you can change. And then we have these world leaders, who want to drive political change. They come and say, no, you can change. You got it within you to change. In fact, some of you who may remember the presidential campaign of President Barack Obama several years ago, his one word for his campaign was change. That was the one word with which he wrote his campaign, and he said, we are the change that we seek. In fact, Gandhi himself, a long time ago, he said, you must be the change you wish to see in the world. So everybody tells you, either you deny change or they say you got it within you to change. Or, in some countries, whether you like it or not, they have pretty strong laws to make you change. You just fall in line or I'll just kill you. So, but in all of this, those of us who have tried really hard to change, even a small thing in our lives, know how hard it is, isn't it? So where do we turn to in all of this? And why is it that it is so difficult to change? Why is it so difficult to change the world? And why is it so difficult to change ourselves? That's a natural question, isn't it? If change were so easy, everybody should be able to do it. If change were so easy, we should just be able to go and change the world and make it a better place. Well, you can only change things that are within your control. I mean, why is it that we can't change the world around us? Because we don't have control of these external things that are around us. And why is it that we are not able to change ourselves? Whether it doesn't matter if you're a religious person or a non-religious person. If you've really tried hard at changing one aspect of your life, you know how hard it is. You realize very quickly it's not possible. It's not that easy to change. So it is in this context that we come to this passage that we read today. And it talks about Jesus Christ, who says he's going to be able to change everything. Now, if someone has to change, they should have some credibility to back up that they can actually change something. If your car is broken down, and if I come to you and I have no expertise on fixing a broken car, and if I'm a software engineer, and I say, I can change the bad engine in your car, it's nice to hear, but I really can't because I don't know. So if Jesus says he's going to be able to change, how is he going to do this? Who is he? Is he even capable of doing this? What makes him the person who can actually bring about this change in our lives? And that's what I want to share this morning with us in the passage that we read. We want to see in this passage what it talks about. Who is Jesus Christ? And what does he do? And how does he bring about change in a real way in all of our lives? And it begins, it talks about who Jesus Christ is in the first 5 verses, Colossians chapter 1, 15 to 20. It gives 5 things about who Jesus is. Who he is in his relationship with God, in his relationship with the world, in his relationship with the church, in his relationship with us, in his relationship with change. And that's what I want to share briefly today. And it's important for us to understand this. Now, the first thing it talks about who is Jesus Christ is verse 15. He says, he is the image of the invisible God. Now, the one who's going to change us has to be someone who has some higher power and capability that you and me do not have. And that is what Paul is beginning to share with us here in this passage. He says, you know who Jesus Christ is? He is the image of the invisible God. In today's scientific world, it's very difficult for people to actually believe that there is a God, and because we are being programmed into thinking you can only believe what you can see and test and prove. Now, we can't see that God exists. How can we test that God exists? In fact, we live in San Francisco Bay Area. And you know that a vast majority of people in the San Francisco Bay Area, 65% or more, do not believe or know if there is a God. They're very agnostic. They're like, how do I know that there is a God? I can't see him. I can't believe him. But you see, Jesus Christ was not a mythological figure. We journeyed through the Gospels. Many people don't even give him a chance to read and understand who he is. He was a historical person who lived and who changed people's lives. But the most interesting thing here is the word that is used for Jesus Christ. It says he is the image of God. And the word for image is icon. How do we know a God who is invisible? How can we know a God who is invisible? He needs to express himself in some way, isn't it? Now, if we remember in the Old Testament, when God shows up to Israelites, he says, you cannot have any image whatsoever. It's one of the 10 commandments. You're not supposed to worship any image because that deprives me of who I am. But if you look at it, yeah, we don't want to create an image, but also without imagining something about who God is, you really can't know who he is. So in a sense, there is a dilemma, right? We can't project our own image of God, but at the same time, without a proper image, we don't know who God is. So God solves this crisis by sending Jesus Christ, and he says, he is my image. Now the problem is, okay, why don't we just take a picture and snapshot of Jesus Christ and, hang him in our houses and, Sometimes we even see Christ as the head of this house, and he's the unseen guest in every meal right next to our dining areas. It's just nice, this Last Supper thing, Christ sitting like that. I mean, I don't want to, don't feel bad and take those things out. I'm not saying to beat you up. But if you actually think about it, that's just one snapshot of one moment of the life of Jesus Christ. Does that really communicate everything about him? The best thing is to go and look at people's Facebook profile photos if you do that. It's always their best picture. It's where you're glowing and gleaming, and there's like either a beautiful backdrop behind you, or if you're an adventurous person, you're doing skiing or skydiving pictures. Have you ever seen that? But does that one picture tell you everything about that person? It doesn't. Because we are actually complicated people. It doesn't tell you the times when we are upset and how we look like when we are upset. Have you ever seen your face when you're upset? Everybody else sees, they'll tell you that you don't look good. But with God, He is someone who has so many different facets. And how can you portray and project all these characteristics of God in one shot so no picture can capture it? It can only be captured in the person of Jesus Christ. And he actually demonstrated this. When Jesus walked on earth, he demonstrated the love of God, the grace of God, the mercy of God, and even the wrath of God. You remember he walks into the temple and he beats everybody up who is trying to make money out of God? Because God is someone who has all these attributes perfectly in unison, synchronized and working together, and there is no one snapshot that can express this God. And that's why Jesus Christ comes to reveal to us through his life, his death and his resurrection who God is. And that's the icon, that's the image God wants to give us. And he says, worship Christ. Isn't that beautiful? So if you want to know God, you have to know Christ. And Christ displays all of these attributes. He says, he who has seen me has seen the Father. And he's the prototype of creation. He's the first one intermediary who comes to reveal Jesus Christ to us. And in verse 16, it says the second thing. So first thing is Christ is the icon of God, the image of God. Second thing says, for by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. The second thing it talks about who is this Jesus Christ is, we read about the life of Christ in the Gospels, right? If you go through the Gospels, it talks about who Jesus Christ is from the time he was born, he lives, he dies. But Jesus existed before even he came into this world. Who was Jesus Christ before he came into this world? There was an aspect of Jesus Christ that we will miss if we are just going to read the Gospels, and that's why we are taking this journey today. And here it talks about what they call the theologians as the pre-incarnate Christ, and how he was so above everything. He's the one who created everything. Remember, the person, we're all talking about change, is first of all, he needs to be able to have the power to change us, the credibility, and he demonstrates that by having all the characteristics, all the attributes in perfect fashion, unlike any of us for whom our attributes, our characters are not in perfect uniformity. Secondly, it talks about he actually has a power over the entire created world. And he talks about three things. He created the heaven and the earth. He talks about things that he's created, the visible and the invisible, the microbes, the microorganisms, through the nano stuff to the mega galaxies. And then he talks about all the power centers, whether it's kingdoms or rulers or even the power structures in your workplaces. It's when you want to understand who Christ is, just look at the creation. To show you, first of all, the magnitude of the creation shows you the greatness of Jesus Christ. One simple example is our sun that we have in our solar system. It has a diameter that is 100 times the size of the earth. That's the diameter of the sun. And you can actually fit in 1.3 million planets inside the sun. And it's not just the magnitude of things. And this sun is just one of a million or a billion stars in the galaxy, and there are millions of galaxies too. So you see, who we are is just one tiny people in one small planet that is part of the solar system and the universe and the galaxy, and it's just not even the galaxy, it's just one of the millions of galaxies, which we don't even know how many are there. And it says Jesus Christ actually created them. It's not just the vastness, it's even the design of the galaxies, how complicated things are. It says a change in the Earth's rotation around the sun on its axis could actually be catastrophic. If the axis is shifted even a little bit, our planet can either become too hot or too cold to support life. And if you look at the distance between the moon and the earth, if that distance were off by even a millionth of an inch, you could either have the ocean waves come and take over and inundate the entire planet. And if you look at the composition of the gases, even a slight change in those compositions could actually be very fatal. A change in the mass of a proton could actually result in dissolution of hydrogen atoms completely, which actually make up the vast majority of gases in the universe. So you see the complexity of creation, the magnanimity of creation, the complexity of creation, they just show us, and that's why in Proverbs it talks about the wisdom of God. He's someone who's not only capable, he's not only someone who has all the characteristics, he's also someone who was able to design masterfully this vast universe that you can't even think, you don't even know how much it is. Someone who is so perfect in his character and his attributes, and someone who was able to create this complex world, it actually helps me to be at ease because he is in control of both the visible and the invisible world, and anything that happens, if there is one person who can fix it, it is him. And since he knows time from back to front and front to back and stands out of it, he knows my future. He knows what's happening in my life right now. He knows what is going to happen in my life tomorrow. He knows what has happened in my life in the past. And guess what? Since he is outside of time, he is someone to whom you can entrust yourself, knowing that he is going to take care of you to bring the change you so desire to see, whether it's in your marriage, whether it's in your sickness, whether it's in your work, or whatever it may be. It's beautiful. And it may look for us living in time, oh, this is so hard. As I am going through this difficult phase in my life, it is so unbearable. Before it even happened, Christ knew about it. And he knows that we are going through this right now. And he knows that he's going to be able to turn it to be good. And finally he says in verse 18, and he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning of the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. It's all great what we heard about Christ. But if you look around the world, say, where is God? Doesn't look like he's there. Look what's happening. So you see, Christ didn't actually just withdraw after creating. He says he wants to demonstrate to us he's actually starting to change by creating a new group of people called the church. The word ecclesia refers to called out. It's like there's a difference between people who live in a country and those who have voting rights. I mean, you can live in the United States as an immigrant. You can even get a job. You can even work. But most of us know that's just not enough to help you to vote. To be able to have voting rights, you need to be a citizen. And if you have a voting right, you can actually participate in the life of how this country works. And that's the same with the church, where Christ says, there is all these people in the world, there's so many things messed up, I'm going to pick a few people, and I'm going to show how these people can change, how these people can give hope to a hurting, healing world, and I'm going to lead this. I am the head of this church. And he doesn't just do it. He says this is going to comprise of people who will not only just live, but they will also conquer death. They will have that experience as well, and there is a visible demonstration that change is going to be possible. And it says, verse 19, "For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell." Jesus was not just a guru, a teacher, or a really cool, smart guy who gave incredible tips to day-to-day living. He had all the fullness of God. You see, after Jesus died and was resurrected, and as the church was beginning to grow, people weren't able to understand who is this Jesus Christ. And in the small town called Colossae, was kind of not a big town like many other towns. The Greek philosophers always thought the world is bad and God cannot actually create. God cannot create a world because God is good, but the world is evil. And so they thought Jesus Christ is not someone who can be fully God if he's trying to do all these things. He's a lesser form of God. And so here's Paul telling them, no, he was God. This is what makes him God. He has all these beautiful attributes of love and mercy and kindness and grace and compassion and wrath. And at the same time, he is also the God who created this beautiful world. This world is not bad. It was not bad when it was created. And finally, who is Christ? This is the most pinnacle of the definition of who Christ is. He says, Christ is the reconciler. He says, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. You see, when you talk about reconciliation, we know when you say reconciliation, it means there's an enmity between two things. Things aren't always great. And so far he talked about Christ and who he is and how great this world was that he created. But he doesn't tell you what happened in between till we are now. A lot of things happened that went wrong. The world and people and you and me, we went against him. And so now there is an enmity between God and us. And that is why the world is hurting. That is why the creation is groaning. And he says, Christ is the master changer, because he alone is the one who is going to be able to reconcile everything, your life, the world, and all the hurt and the pain that you're seeing. That's who Christ is. These 5 aspects of Christ. Who he was this awesome creator. He was God, an icon, an image of God himself. And he was fully God, and he was the reconciler. And now it starts getting personal. Paul shifts gears a little bit. And he talks about you and me. And he says in verse 21, and you who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds. It was interesting because both for the Greek philosophers and even in our world today, who are thought to be the smartest people? You have value in the world today if you have a lot of education, if you work for one of the top 5 companies in the Bay Area, and if you have been to some of these premium schools. When you drop those names, people look up. It's like, wow, you went to that school? You must be a smart guy. Because the world values our mind and tries to define our identity and our smartness just by our intellectual capabilities. It was not very different from the Greeks. That's exactly what they did too. And that's exactly where Paul is saying, actually, the whole problem was because of your mind. It says you are hostile in your mind doing evil deeds. He was like mocking the Greeks, and he was telling, what you feed your mind with, it grows. See, why do we actually have so much problem in this world? I was watching a YouTube video on addiction for food, okay? Because I'm addicted to certain foods, and sure, many of you are. And they actually, it's a classic video. You guys should check it out on YouTube. They did some research to find out how the fast food industry publishes research papers to see how they can actually get us addicted to food. So they have a combination of salt, sweet, and fat. And there is a perfect ratio of these 3, which when it is put in a product, it activates certain trigger points in your brain. that makes you want to go for it again and again and again. And they make all these fast foods to be very small. They dissolve by the time it even passes the half of your mouth. Think of your Cheetos or chips or whatever. It's so that you keep going more and more for it, because we have these addictive centers in our brain. And the same thing is with the gaming industry too. They figure out the right combination to trigger these points, so we just can't stop. You start playing a game, it gets you. Why is it like that? And in the same way, he says here, our mind is not neutral, it's not perfect. It's been distorted by sin. Let's get a little deeper into this. What is the problem here? What is the problem with our mind? Because it is distorted by the sin, we become very self-centered people. We want to do things that give us instant gratification and pleasure at any cost. Just the same reasons why we go for these snacks, which we actually know are not good for our health, but we just can't stop it, right? You see that, you have to go for it. And it is the same way with our sinful tendencies with our mind is, when you're given an opportunity, you want to do what you think is going to give you happiness without any regard to the person around you, whether it is even your own spouse or your friend at work or your neighbors or even the larger world. Now you start this, initially you try to do this a few times, and your mind gets programmed and says, I like this. Because guess what? It actually gives a short-term joy. There is a kick you get out of it instantly when you know that this is making you feel happy, because at that point you're just focused on yourself and the joy that it looks like it gives you. And then the cycle goes, and then once that memory is registered in your mind, you keep going and it becomes a lifestyle, and you can fall at it again and again. How can this be fixed? That's our problem. That's our universal problem. For all of us, at the end of the day, we can be very nice people as long as nobody steps in our territory. The moment someone steps into our territory on our toes, we fight back. Or you are trying to take away something which I find is giving me happiness, and a real ugly self starts coming about. And that actually is the reason for all the problem in the world. It's the reason why in some families the husbands are not faithful to their spouses, because they find after years of marriage there is this other person they see in their place of work who is so attractive, so smart, so handsome than the wife they live day in and out with, or a husband they live day in and out with, that they are drawn away from being faithful to their spouses. And these are the same temporal joys that which our mind is so warped and it gets drawn off. So how can we change? That is the change we seek. And the same thing is with anger. Anger is just a result of a reaction to someone or something who tried to take this joy from us with what we like to do. And we fight because we want this joy. We want to keep this irrespective of, even if it hurts our own selves, we want to go for it. That's a problem. This is the real deepest thing from which we want change from, isn't it? And that's where Jesus Christ comes in. And it says here that He has now reconciled, in verse 22, in His body of flesh by His death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before Him. Wow. You know what it took to bring this change inside us? It took this Jesus Christ to take our flesh, this mind that we are talking about, part of this humanness that we all possess. He took that and He nailed it on the cross. And He overcame all of these tendencies to want to hurt others for the sake of our own joy, because He left the joy that He had before the foundation of the world and emptied Himself and took up the cross, and He gave His life away, so that if there is one person who can actually help this change to happen from deep inside out, it's Jesus Christ. And He did this by reconciling us by His body of flesh, so that it says, you know what He does? It's interesting. He doesn't now come and give us new rules to follow. He now doesn't say, okay, now since I'm this perfect master creator and master blaster of change, this is what you have to do to be Mr. Nice Guy. He says He's going to create a new image in us, a new icon in us. And this icon, this image that He's going to create, He's not just going to repair and fix our broken mind, our broken self. He's not going to do some external fixes. He says He's just going to give a totally new image that is His image. And you cannot earn it. You cannot buy it. You cannot work hard to get it. He just gives it free by His grace. And what does this image do when we receive this image from Christ? It says what it does is three things. It makes us holy. Holiness is, being separated from sin and being set apart for God. It gives you freedom from the cycle that you're going all through your life, of whether it is just a habit of being addicted to, scenes or things on the screen that keep you trapped in, or whether it is being addicted to food, or whether it is being addicted to anything in your life that you're unable to free yourself from. Says He's able to set you free from that and present you blameless. And that's the second thing. He's able to make us holy. And secondly, He's able to change us to be blameless. Blamelessness is a step above holiness. It talks about spotless character. He's able to really change our character. And people who actually encountered Christ throughout history, you can actually see their lives changed. From the one extreme, you hear all these drug addicts and murderers and people, especially if you go into prison. I want to encourage you all, if you've never been there, to join Brother Satya as he goes to this Santa Rita prison. You see those people there. They look big and, tattooed and hard, but you can actually see when they have been touched by the gospel, they have a changed heart. And even those who are not there, most of those people who don't end up there and who live regular lives, they can tell you how their life changed. Not by doing anything, because they're experiencing this new image being created in them. And it says not just holy and blameless, above reproach, which means nobody can point fingers at you. And this is where it's beautiful, because every time you fail, there is Satan trying to come and tell you, see, you messed up. That's it. God can't love you anymore. You shouldn't be doing that, but you did it again. It's over. But when it's all about Christ and it's not about us, you can tell back to Him, it's not because of my holiness, my goodness, it's because of Christ. And He can actually change it because of what He did. That's who Jesus is, and that's what He did. So what? So what? That's the glorious gospel. That's the glorious gospel. And if we have actually experienced this, He says, there are some consequences. There are certain changes. There are certain things in our life. He says, if indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and of which I, Paul, became a minister. He says, if this has been a reality in your life, there is a way for it to be a reality. It doesn't happen when you are by yourself. Holiness is not an individualistic thing. We are so tuned to living in a very affluent country where we are trained to do everything ourselves, and the culture is also very individualistic, autonomous, we sometimes think even holiness is like that. I can just, do my own thing and change and become a better person. No. He says that's why He's created a community. You can't do it alone. You really can't do it alone. And that's why we have in our church, we really encourage people to be part of small groups. No one can be so super spiritual that you say, no, I don't need a small group. I'm fine. I can read my Bible. I'll do my thing and I'll be fine. Because it is in that group, despite our messiness, we can see how Christ is actually changing and forming one another. And you can actually see when you have experienced this change in your life, of how Christ has reconciled you to God, you want to do that to others. And that's the second thing you would want to do, is to find ways in which you can be a reconciler too. That's our new identity. And that is a question to ask ourselves. A church needs to be a place where every single person is finding someone or something that they can engage themselves with to reconcile, be a minister of reconciliation. Is this happening in our lives? Do you have a place that you can go to and open your life and share your struggles and be prayed upon or be encouraged or hear from God's word to transform you, because you can't do it alone? And have you found what is it that God has put in your heart that you want to participate in this ministry of reconciliation He does through us? What change do you want to see in the world? Is there some brokenness that is touching your heart that you think you can make a difference? Then I think we need to be involved in that. And as a church, we want to help you to do that. We're going to have a special summer outreach to minister to children who come from homes where they're not able to be taken care of, by helping them in their education and by helping them in their daily life situations. So we are going to create these opportunities and possibilities, but it's for each of us to first be plugged in to a group where we can grow together, and secondly, to find something like this where we can actually be those reconcilers, and even simply to share this with our friends, with people with whom we rub shoulders with. And that's our whole One Cube challenge. Have we found that one person that we so care about, that we so love, that we want to have them experience the change that you do? Well, that's going to imply that you have experienced change first. And if we have, you cannot but not resist to share this with others. That's the essence of change. As changed people, God wants to use us to change people. Not by giving them a new set of rules, not by giving them a new religion, but by pointing them to Christ, who is this awesome God Himself, and who is this one who has control over everything that you and me don't have control to, whether it is our life situations, in our homes, in our workplaces, or even world situations. Christ is above all and beyond all, and ultimately to change us from the inside out, from our minds that are so addictive and are repeatedly drawn to the selfishness and wanting to keep our joy the most. He's actually able to set us free from that. And He's inviting us this morning to be part of that, so that we can be reconcilers too. It is the most joyful thing in the world is to know that you have been reconciled to this holy God, and you are living a different life that you have never experienced before, and then you are sharing that different reconciled life and replicating that somewhere and with someone. If you have all these three things in your life is a purposeful life. Your life really will bring you meaning, joy, happiness, and satisfaction, knowing that you are changing constantly every day, because this new icon, this new image of Christ is being formed in you slowly but steadily. You are not who you were a year ago or 5 years ago. And then you are now not just keeping this change within yourself, you're bringing it out. You're trying to experience this change together in a community, and you're trying to replicate yourself in other persons or in places to reflect this Christ. And that's the glory of the gospel. And that is a life that is worth living.